Welcome to the White Sox Recap Podcast here on the Recap Network and wherever you subscribe to podcasts. I'm Ryan McGuffey. The White Sox have found their next manager. Scott Merkin of MLB.com dropped a Merk bomb during Game 4 of the World Series that Will Venable will be named the next manager on the South Side. The resume is lengthy and impressive, working with names like Theo Epstein, Joe Maddon, Bruce Bochy. The pedigree is there. So what does it mean for the Sox moving forward? The coaching staff, the roster. Brian Anderson joins me to discuss all of these questions and gives a personal history with Will Venable as the pair used to work out together and get swole in the off seasons. It's the White Sox Recap Podcast, and it starts right now. All right, BA, in the flesh, first off. Yeah, where's the draft?
Well,
the
draft's still back in Omaha. Couldn't make it. It didn't fit my truck. It's 12 feet tall.
Well, it was quite the talk of the first podcast that we did together. And you know, a week later, here we are. We talked about on the first podcast, you know, who the manager, what the list looked like, who it might be. Your finalist included Will Venable. And here we find out during Game 4 of the World Series that while not yet official, that we're just waiting for the White Sox to make it official, whether it's on an off day or after the World Series goes final, that Will Venable will, in fact, be the next manager of the Chicago White Sox. Your initial impression?
Yeah, it just made so much sense to me, right? He checks all the boxes. I know you're going to get some pushback, or, you know, you may have some concerns. The media, the fans may have some concerns about, oh, he's never managed before. But like we had spoke before the show, how are you supposed to get manager experience until you've managed, right? So, I mean,
Ozzie Guillen, right? Yeah. Never had managed until all of a sudden you got the opportunity. I think, look, there always should be concern with the White Sox when you talk about like this role, at least as of late. However, the last 12 to 24 hours, for the first time in a long time, certainly the last two seasons, if you look up and down social media, and I'm talking about people who played the game, people who've covered the game for a long time, teammates, former teammates, anybody that had a trace to Will Venable, everyone's saying the same thing. The White Sox got this one right. So maybe for the first time in a while, it should be applauded that Chris Getz had his process, went through it his way, kept quiet, very few leaks during the process. We talked about this on Inside the Clubhouse last week, that there has been no noise coming from 35th and Shields. And there was noise in the past coming from 35th and Shields. I think this was handled the perfect way.
Yeah, I mean, look at the body of work, right? I think that sometimes we fail as fans and as media of like looking back and saying like, what has this guy been up to? And I remember working out with Will and that like awesome group we had back in the day. And
which included who?
Yeah, I mean, it was nuts. I mean, down at Fitness Quest 10 with Todd Durkin and that staff was incredible. But the camaraderie we had Nick Hunley, Mark Pryor, Chris Young, the GM, Will Venable, amongst many others. There's a ton of guys that would come in and out of there outside of football. So again, like you got to look at this guy's body of work, and you look at who he's attached himself to over the last few years, maybe half a decade, right? You look at most recently with Bruce Bochy, right?
Yeah.
Winner. I mean, who's been a better manager than that guy over the last 15 years?
Hall of Famer.
Yeah, right.
Will be Hall of Famer.
And then his time with Alex Cora, championship in 18, right?
Yep.
Or that core group or that franchise is a winner. And then also, attaching himself to Theo Epstein, right?
Hall of Famer, maybe the best team builder of all time, Joe Maddon.
Yeah.
I mean Theo Epstein's first Will Venable, he went from player to front office. And the first person that called him and hired him was Theo Epstein.
Yeah.
So think about that. I mean, you're transitioning from the field, which was an 8.5, 9-year career, most of which was in San Diego. And Theo Epstein is calling you to come to the Cubs as part of this rebirth and rebuild of that situation. And then you get to learn on the field from those are Hall of Fame names we just talked about. I mean, Joe Maddon's going to be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Bruce Bochy is already solidified himself as a Hall of Famer. He's won 4 damn World Series. There's a couple of things that are interesting. Like Venable last year was a hot candidate for jobs in Cleveland, for jobs in New York. Both of which, ironically, both the Mets and the Guardians go to their respective championship series. And he's taking now the team with the worst record in the history of the game. I think all of that stuff just needs to be tabled because Will Venable, in my opinion, is not here as a bridge guy. Do you agree? Like, he's not the get me over fastball until they're ready to win.
Absolutely. So he, in my opinion, this is a long-term play for everybody. You coming into a no pressure situation, not that the fans aren't going to be tough. Chicago media can be tough, but you're looking at an opportunity here where it didn't get any worse, right? The White Sox will never be worse than they were last year. That I truly believe that. But you look at a guy with his past, his credentials, and the culture building opportunity they have. It is my belief that in spring training, or even right now, he's going to set the standard. And they've done a tremendous job these last couple of years under Chris Young and Nick Hundley doing the director of culture stuff over with the Texas Rangers. He's done an incredible job of getting things right over there. Right? I know they didn't have a great year this year, but dealing with injuries, everyone has that happen to their organization sometimes. But man, he could not be in a better situation. I think the slate will be clean. He'll set the standard early in spring training and get those guys all pulling in the same direction.
All right. So Chris Getz has had a lot of criticism, and I think rightfully so. Some warranted, some maybe not. He was handed kind of a shit hand, right? Like, I mean, like, let's be frank. When he got that job, no one's going to turn that job down, but the roster, he did quote unquote build the roster of the 41 and 121 White Sox. They knew they were losing 100 games. Chris said 105, 110. I'm surprised we lost 121. However, the relationships he has in the game, the people that he's tabbing and bringing along into the organization from outside the Kansas City Royals, which everyone, Will Venable's doesn't have a pass with the Royals. But I mean, if you look at their front office right now, Venable's relationship with Chris Getz is a big part of the reason that he's here. This, to me, says a lot about how people in the game feel about Chris Getz, that they know that he's smart. They know that he's impressive, and he's clearly laid a blueprint or created a blueprint to say, here's my plan. Whether it comes to fruition or not, we'll see. But the smarter people I can have in the room around me, you're going to take this thing through. And that's what I think happened here.
Look at the people he's brought in the last 24 months. You got Brian Bannister, accomplished pitcher, pedigree out the wazoo with his dad, and that's just a baseball family. It's incredible. So brings
Josh Barfield.
Yep, Barfield from Arizona.
Venable. Also, like, all of these guys have dads in the game.
Yes,
Venable, dad in the game.
Yes. And also, like, look at where these guys have been, all winners, right? And you look at like Josh Barfield coming over here, the era in which all these coaches are former players, right? We all kind of played during the same time. And again, we talk about that generational shift and current players, former players. Well, this is a generational shift in the coaching and administration department. It's all guys that played in a similar era. And naturally, right, in life, right? You and I have been friends for 2 decades. Like, we ended up wanting to come do something together. And now's the time for that. But those guys, right, like, they all played against each other. There's a gradual weaning out process of guys you want to work with and who you don't. And Chris Getz is in a power position to hire and fire who he wants. Why not work with people you want to be around?
And we talked about this last week, but former player background and current with this generation. I mean, you can look on the back of Venable's baseball card, and it was less than 10 years ago he was playing the game. How much does that matter to this? Because you've been coaching, for those who don't know, you've been coaching in big time Power 5 college conferences, and these kids at 20 and 21 years old, what they're looking for if they're lucky enough and fortunate enough to be drafted in Major League Baseball. So being in an organization with a staff of former players, and I'm talking about recent former players, what does that mean to those guys?
Yeah, I mean, speaking on the college level briefly, you want those kids to want to be like you, have your career, right? And then protect them from the things that don't work or the stupid, idiotic mistakes you made as a player, right? The stupid shit you do off the field that you don't want them to follow your footsteps in that regard. But as far as like the big league's concerned, like, there's some credibility there. And not every great big league manager had a great big league career, right? That's false. But when you're looking to make an organizational change and really shift and get that thing right, you want someone that can say, hey, dude, I was doing this shit, 10 years ago. I know what it's like to go 0 for 20. Hey, man, I got you. I'm not going to let you fail. And I think that's one thing like that had Will had instilled in him, like from the Theo Epstein mindset. It was like Dustin Pedroia struggled his first year and they pulled him in. I know Terry Francona, Theo, I think, pulled him in and said, hey, you better figure it out, dude. We don't have another second baseman. You're our guy. figure it out. We got you. We're going to support you. So I think that's the mentality that Will's going to have. Articulate, polished. He has the credibility with the Princeton background for all the nerds out there that think that has to do with anything with baseball, but he's checking every box. And so for the White Sox fans out there, I won't name names right now, White Sox Dave, but for those White Sox fans out there that are a little pessimistic about the vision, I'll say give it another year, right? And then if they do crappy next year, I'll say give it another year.
Yeah, I mean, they're asking people to wait that have been waiting. Okay. I mean, the vision, I think, is a separate podcast because we're going to know a lot more about that here in the coming weeks. The GM meetings are next week as we tape this, which is another reason you had to have your manager in place. But when you look at Venable, one huge critique and criticism I've had of pretty much most of the staff since Ozzie Guillen has been what's going on here. When I'm having to Google half of the staff, I feel like I know a lot of the names, even the fringe names that came up and through the game. When I'm doing that, when I'm Googling Pedro Grifal's coaching staff and Robin Ventura's coaching staff, and maybe to a lesser extent, not necessarily Tony La Russa, but I think this staff's going to look different. I think this staff's going to have names on it that make more sense. Grady Sizemore is an interesting name I want to bring up too, because he was a finalist in this puppy all the way down to the wire. What does a Will Venable coaching staff look like to you, and what does it need to look like?
Yeah, I think a guy like Will leans on former coaching staff. He might reach out to Boch and say, hey, like I have these couple guys in mind. What do you think? And maybe there's an opportunity to poach a couple guys over from Texas, right? Maybe Chris Young saying like, hey, I get it. There's always a gradual process of where coaches want to ascend to the top. So maybe there's a guy in the minor leagues that Will really likes as far as player development, culture, just brings a certain energy he may want around that organization. But again, like if I'm Will Venable, I'm taking a hard look with Chris Getz, like, hey, who do we have that we can promote within that will give this team some credibility and help build this thing the right way? And also, who can we bring in from the outside that has a tradition of winning and brings, again, a certain energy that is going to get these guys pulling in the same direction? I know we'll harp on that a lot, but last year's team was terrible, right? It was.
But the culture, and no one wants to hear this shit because they always I bring it up and the people are like, oh, who cares about a clubhouse if the team sucks? The culture did change last year. And maybe Pedro has I do think that was more from the front office than it was the manager trying to play fast and all this crap before the season started. They were bringing in 1-year stopgap guys, Paul DeYoung, Nicky Lopez types, veterans who had been in the game for a while and weren't going to take the BS of not hustling, etc. Even though there were a few guys, you might have seen me talk about some of them. But it did clean up some of the room despite what was happening on the field. So I do think I think Venable will now take that baton and instill what he wants. But I'm curious, you talked about the holdovers or guys to promote from within. Do you think Grady Sizemore's on this? Like, he has a contract. Yeah. He's contracted through the 2025 season.
Yeah, I need to take a page out of that book because I see these multi-year deals.
I hired you as a $15 an hour intern, so maybe this leads to.
I'm on a servitude contract here. I think these multi-year deals are great, but I was always as a player on a year-to-year basis, right? Like via circa 1955, right, where you had to play well before they locked you up for 2 years, right? But yeah, if I'm Will, if this is my team, I would be foolish, in my opinion, not to keep Grady around. There's players, he has that credibility. In my opinion,
I agree with you.
Future Hall of Famer. He would have been a future Hall of Famer had he not gotten hurt. He was an incredible player.
I told him this recently, a couple weeks ago. In 2005, down the stretch, when they were charging hard, and I mean, they were playing at a clip that was as equal to you guys in the first half. The White Sox were just playing 500 ball in the second half. There was no player that scared me more in the second half of 2005 than Grady Sizemore.
It was insane. He was on base all the time. He was making great plays. You had to listen to all his 300 girlfriends in left center field at Progressive Field.
Is that why he dropped the ball? He dropped the ball in Kansas City that kind of opened the flood.
That's right.
He said, I mentioned that to him, and he said, Jerry thanks me every day, which is why I think I'm here in this seat.
Yeah. No, but again, I think Will Venable has to take a hard look at keeping someone like him around. I don't know their relationship, but if I'm him, I'm sticking him as one of the bench coaches just to, again, solidify that staff and to appease the media, right? We have all these people in the media like,
Okay, I'm sick. Stop doing that.
Yeah.
Well, but yeah, me. I'm
Yeah.
sitting here going, I want to hear more about your staff, but I do.
Yeah.
I think that's part of. I don't want to see some kind of like somebody else's failed project.
Yeah.
Like
No,
failed
I hear
hitting.
you.
I want the up and coming names that are going to be Will Venable. Like I want Will Venable now to hire the next Will Venables. I have a name for you because one of his closest friends in the game is Dodgers manager Dave Roberts.
Right.
Clayton McCullough's name was like a favorite for a long time.
Sure.
A lot of people assumed that he was going to get the job. We brought him up last week. Is that a guy? Maybe that's a guy. Maybe Clayton McCullough is pulled out of the first base coaching box after winning the World Series, which is going to happen.
Sure.
And he's brought here in a larger role as part of Will Venable's staff.
If my wife and I are in LA with a young daughter, we have a great setup in Los Angeles, and we just win the World Series, there's absolutely no shot she's letting us move back to Chicago. And I'm not taking into account that she's from here, right? But yeah, I mean, every coach is looking to ascend in some way, shape, or form. But if you have a great setup, if I'm coaching with Dave Roberts, I'm being compensated fairly, there's absolutely no way I'm leaving. But why not, right? If you don't ask, you don't get. That's one of the greater terms in business and in real life, right? So he's going to ask. And again, I would be foolish to think he doesn't already have a short list.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that came up in the meetings of what the staff is and going to be and who the people he's already probably talked about. It's not the first time Will Venable's name has been on a managerial list. And when you're going into these interviews, these very long, arduous, like long ass day interviews, you're going to walk in with, here's my coaching staff. And maybe Brian Anderson should be considered. I'm just throwing that little.
Yeah, I'm staying out of that one.
I'm just throwing that little out there. I don't think Will Venable being hired says much about the roster and how, like, I don't think there's a large spending spree coming now because Will Venable's the next manager of the Chicago White Sox.
Yeah, I think that was predetermined. I mean, there's so much that goes into contract negotiations, right? From Will Venable's standpoint, it's like if you're Chris Getz, you have to convince Will Venable to leave Texas, which is a great setup, right? His friends are in the front office. He's with Boch. Boch was a part of that crew.
Boch is only under contract through next season.
Exactly.
Which
right?
I thought, honestly, when he pulled his name out, that he might have been a manager in waiting there.
Yeah, no, but for sure, you got to entice that person to leave, right? Whether that's the money, the contractual, the years involved, right? Similar to a player. But yeah, I mean, he obviously felt it was the right deal for him and his family. And again, it's a no pressure situation in regards to how many games you're going to win next year. There's a lot longer leash. There's a lot longer runway to figure things out here than, let's say, in a New York or even, in Atlanta, right? Atlanta's got that winning culture back from the early to mid 90s. So you have a lot longer leash here where you can build it out the right way.
So we will wait for the official announcement, which could come as you are listening to this podcast, whenever you might be. I love the little tidbit that Will Venable's brother was Winston Venable, who played for the Chicago Bears. Okay, was a special teams ace of the 2011 Chicago Bears. Hat tip to Chris Tannehill on that one, because I'd known that. I had to look that up last night. I'm like, I feel like his brother played on the Bears. I didn't know like the special teams and exactly what year, but so a lot of things to come now for the White Sox after the World Series, and this is for any team not playing in the World Series. That as soon as the World Series goes final, basically the offseason begins. Sure. We have opt-ins, opt-outs. We have the GM meetings, the trade talks. Last year, we had the big bomb that Craig Counsell took the job, or Craig Counsell was hired by the Cubs and David Ross was out. I don't know if we'll see that type of bomb at the GM meetings. The big thing I think that's next for the White Sox is the trade of Garrett Crochet and or
that's
Luis
not even
Robert.
My big trade chip. I got
Who's your biggest trade? That's not your biggest trade chip?
No, I mean I think that there'd be a mass there would be a fire sale going on. That the fans would not appreciate that. I don't know.
But you got to look. But hang on, though.
I agree. I agree.
This is ships in the night.
Totally.
There's 2 years left on a deal. Where are the White Sox going for the next 2 years?
Well, exactly. But the thing is,
you
never know. Maybe I'm just under I'm just delusional, right? Maybe I'm sitting there going, somewhere in America at some point in Major League history, there's been a young team with a new coach that's won, right? And my big thing is that until they prove they can't win at the beginning of the season, you usually know in the first 20 to 30 games, right? But I'm gonna circle back with you. So I'm circle back, right? So my big thing is look at what they have. There's nothing against Luis Robert. I
It's
admire
okay.
him as a player. No, I admire him as a player. Let's talk strictly baseball.
Okay.
Strictly baseball ability here.
All right.
Yeah, like when you don't run a ball out, you're dead to me. I can't handle that. But
how about when you play less than 100 games?
Yeah.
Every season in your career except one.
So that's where I go with that, right? Garrett
Okay.
Crochet is absolutely insane. He's top three best three pitchers in baseball, in my opinion. But you look at Luis Robert. In my opinion, he stays healthy and plays hard, plays 150 plus games. He has Mike Trout comp numbers, right? I think you go move him, you move that chip this offseason, you go get back end bullpen, long guy, bullpen guy, and one bat. You go get 3 impact players and replace him and do it ASAP. I know he had a down year. I know he wasn't his best self, but I think you move on from that guy.
I do too. But I think the only way to get that type of package in return that you just said is going to mean you're going to have to package him with another asset. And
hopefully not Crochet.
I think Crochet is gone. I do. And
that right.
Would I love Garrett Crochet as a White Sox for the next 8 years? Yeah. Where do I sign that deal? 100%. But the way the game works with where the White Sox are, and you look at the contract and you look at, or it's 2 years, right? It's 2 years of arbitration before he's a free agent. And I don't think I don't think the two sides are all that interested in sitting down and negotiating a long-term deal when at the deadline, the White Sox had the rug pulled out from them.
Did you see?
They had the rug pulled out from them.
Did you see the recent post? I forget who posted it, but there was a recent post of like Sale, Rodon.
Oh, I saw it.
And someone
most
else.
strikeouts with the slider this year.
And
on the slider.
And I'm going
most strikeouts on the slider this year. Sale, Cease, and Rodon.
I'm looking at that.
I threw a ball.
Holy cow! And understandable when you're not winning, you can't contractually keep all 3 of those guys together at the same time, or keep even 2 of them together if you're not going to win. It's either you're all in or all out, right?
I mean, this is really Dylan Cease all over again.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Garrett Crochet this offseason is. The difference between Cease and Crochet, Cease is back, like his resume had innings pitched, strikeouts for years. I think Garrett Crochet is going to continue to add on. I really do. I think he's going to continue to be one of those dominant guys. But you don't know. He never threw more than 4 innings in any start in the second half.
Yeah.
And if you're going to get a package that's going to change the way your cupboard looks offensively, because right now you have nothing coming really outside of Edgar Caro, and very few catchers are Salvi Perez at the plate, right?
Sure.
It's a demanding job. Colson Montgomery had a great Arizona Fall League. He had a terrible AAA season. So hopefully that's a great sign heading into the offseason. But besides that, you just don't have a lot there. And position players, look, they can't hit the ball out of the ballpark. It's one of the worst, maybe the worst offense we ever saw this year. That needs to change. Like, there not only needs to be studs in that cupboard, there needs to be depth behind those studs. And they don't have either right now. And I think the only way that can change is if they take their 2 biggest assets, their 2, not just one, because I do agree with Luis Robert, their 2 biggest assets, and try to change that narrative right now.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if this is a topic for another show, but just taking a small little dive into this, there's so many moving parts, right? And you look at like different decisions Chris Getz has to make, right? You got to make even more key decisions in the everyday lineup, like a Sheets and an Andrew Vaughn, right? Like Andrew Vaughn, to me, he's always going to be consistent. So if you want to look at him and say, okay, are we okay with 250, 25 and 75? And if I'm Getz, I'm going, that works, because that's tough to replace. People often look at like, man,
he's led the team in RBI the last 3 seasons.
Correct. And
people don't like, that's true.
I've never led my team in RBIs
ever
at the major league level.
Okay.
No, 35 ribbies is not.
No. But I'm saying ever at any point. Like, did you lead? I'm saying at any point, at any level.
Here's my one claim to fame. 2009, I got locked in with Greg Walker. Things were clicking. I was cruising. I was hitting like 350, 370 first like month of the season, right? I'm like, here we go, man. Like, this is what it looks like. Was I going to hit 350? No. 280, 300, play electric center field, turn this thing around, right? Get my career back on track. Take one swing off Eric Bedard, pull my rib out of place. I can't barely breathe. Come back, and I go like, oh, for my next 20. And I remember going to Harold Baines at first base. So I'm like, hey, man, like, I'm 0 for my last 20. He's like, shit, man. He goes, I did way worse than that. And I'm like, you're in the Hall of Fame, dude. Like, shut up. You know what I mean? So,
well, look, a lot to come. Okay. A lot to come. But the first step, I think, is a very, very good one for the White Sox. It's a very strong hire. I'm talking about perception here. I'm talking about perception in the game, not just how I feel about it, how BA feels about it, but how it's being perceived throughout the major leagues today is that the White Sox got this right. I'm going to ask you on the spot to grade the hire. And like this could come back 2 years from now as an awful receipt. This could come back
it's not.
What's the, okay? So what's the hire?
So
grade the hire.
And I am a little biased because I know Will, but I guess when you have more insight, you can make a better prediction, right? So I think this is an A hire. I mean, anyone says A plus, you got to dial it down. Like who's an A plus hire? Maybe a Tony La Russa going to
Bruce Bochy to Texas, maybe.
Oh yeah, correct. That's an A plus hire. Tony La Russa to going to the Cardinals, like that's an A plus hire.
Yes.
This is an A hire to me. He checks every box. Analytics side, smart. Got a chance to learn from 3 Hall of Famers. Chris Young was always there with him every single step of the way. Both Princeton guys. And let me leave you with this. Talk about Venable's brother playing in the NFL. I always pride myself. I was never a great baseball player. I was just a freak athlete, right? I could do everything. Will Venable is a freak. He's a fucking great athlete, man. It's unbelievable. He can run, jump, throw, and he's big.
Can he play outfield? Can he play right field right now?
No, listen, I still have hopes and dreams. Sneak in there a couple games.
BA in the flesh, dude.
Yeah, man.
This is great. This is great. The White Sox are hiring Will Venable, Ryan McGuffey, Brian Anderson, the White Sox Recap Podcast. Putting a bow on this edition. Can't wait to see what's next with the White Sox and with the podcasts.